All right, hello everybody. How we doing? This is Dr. Sam, and we're here to kind of do a little bit more of where we left off last class. In fact, the last unit, we talked about how to calculate overhead rates, and I was talking about how so many times companies would use overhead rates that would simulate peanut butter costing, and we looked at you know how to calculate the rate using just direct labor hour or machine hour, direct labor cost. And then we got exposed to activity-based costing last class, and we went through an example of how, by understanding cost drivers and different types of impact from activity, you might be able to have a better idea of what your overhead rate actually is. So I'm just going to click on what we did last class and a little bit of a summary here if you can see the screen. Hopefully you can. If not, then that would kind of stink and eliminate the whole point of this. But if you remember last class, I gave you something to this effect where gave you budgeted overhead, and the grand total of that budgeted overhead was $100,000, and then it was broken down into different categories, and then gave you the volume. From there, we then did the budgeted overhead divided by that volume, and that gave us the overhead rates. So we had direct labor of $3 per direct labor hour. The machine usage was $8 per machine hour, $200 per setup, $400 per design change, and a partridge in a pear tree. You better be laughing. You better be smiling at least. Okay, just checking. All right, so anyways, we then took this information. Remember, the budgeted overhead is $100,000. Traditionally, we would not have broken this up. We would have just used $100,000 in the numerator. So if I can kind of, I don't think I actually have that anywhere in here, but normally we would have just used that number. But by having the breakdown, we're basically able to do the activity-based costing properly. So anyways, so here was the little problem that we did in class. Assume that, and by the way, hope your spring break went great, and unfortunately this COVID-19 coronavirus is turning our entire world into mass crisis. So, the entire world is trying to figure out how to go about life a whole new way. And school is no different, but unlike other areas of the world, we have a backup plan, and we're doing it right now, which is, being able to communicate in this fashion. So we're kind of lucky from that respects, but I know some of you are struggling. I hope you guys are healthy, let's hopefully we can get through this, stay home, and hopefully we can, lower that curve that they keep talking about from our government, and hopefully get rid of this virus. But anyways, so assume that job 100, now completed, required 1,000 units of direct materials used, 3,000 of direct labor, 500 direct labor hours, 75 machine hours, 2 setups and 2 design changes. Remember that the direct material and the direct labor are basically set in stone. Your ABC under normal conditions is not impacted by your material and labor, so those are pretty much set. I will, though, show you an example shortly from our textbook in Chapter 7 that shows ABC involving all parts of cost, direct and indirect. So I'll show you a little bit of a change there. But to calculate the overhead applied, which is really the whole point of doing this, is trying to come up with your estimated amount to assign to this job. So notice that we took the 500 direct labor hours that were given in the problem, multiplied by the $3 direct labor hour rate, that gave us 1,500. And then we went through and did that with all of the cost drivers, and 1,500 plus 600 plus 400 plus 800 gave us a total of 3,300. If you were there last class, this is all review. So nothing new here. If you missed it, you might want to just kind of take your time going through this when you maybe review it once again. But 1,000 plus 3,000, so that's set in stone, the 4. Remember our last exam, you had something similar to this, where you had these two given to you, but then you had to figure out the applied based on just one level of activity. With ABC, you're using multiple levels of activity. So on the test, you had to do one multiplication and come up with overhead applied and come up with the total. You just had to do that 3 different times based on 3 different volumes. Here we're using multiple volumes within one job calculation. So when you add these all up, the overhead applied comes out to 3,300. Okay, so having said that, 3,300 plus 1,000 plus 3,000 would give you a total of 7,300 for the job. Okay, so now if we were doing this the old-fashioned way, kind of like the previous chapter way, you will notice that I said, what if we were doing this traditionally here, and I've come up with 2 different answers that are different than the answers that we got here. So under ABC, we're saying the total cost to complete the job is 7,300. Under another old traditional way, I'm saying the job total is 9,000, and under another way, it's 5,500. So what other ways am I doing? So let me just show you if we are using direct labor hours for this first column, and the second one is for machine hours. Okay, just to kind of tell you where we're going here. So notice the material and the labor is the same. So that part is not impacted, but our overhead applied is different. So if I want to figure out my overhead based on one level of volume instead of multiple, I went and said, okay, let's use direct labor hours. So notice I have a rate of $10 per hour. That's different than the direct labor usage I got here. So if I was doing it traditionally, I would have taken the 100,000 overall budget. Instead of the 30 that was dedicated direct labor, I would take the full 100, because normally we wouldn't have this breakdown, or we would just ignore it. We would just, our budgeted overhead's 100,000. So if we took 100,000 and divided it by the 10,000 direct labor hours, that's where I came up with the $10 per direct labor hour. Okay, so this is assuming kind of like old school approach. So if I came up with 10, that's where this 10 came from, and I multiplied it by the actual 500 hours that were in this particular job. 10 times 500 gave me 5,000. So that 5,000 is where I got this 5,000. So if I just use direct labor hours only, first off I would have a different overhead rate of 10 instead of a more realistic one of 3 for this example. That would give me applied of $5,000, add that to the material and the labor, and I'm saying the cost of the job is 9,000. So if I said, well, what if I was using machine hours instead? So I got $20 per machine hour, which happens to be, again, 100,000 divided by the total number of machine hours, which was 5,000. So again, I would go 100,000. Let me do it down here. 100,000 is the overall budgeted overhead. Divide that by the 5,000 machine hours. And that would give me my $20 per machine hour. Okay, so that's where this 20 came from. So then I would take the 20 and multiply it by the 75 machine hours that were given in the problem, and that's how I got 1,500. So I would put that 1,500 in here, and voila, add that to my material and my labor, and I come up with 5,500. So if I use machine hours, I'm saying the cost of the job is 5,500. If I'm using, direct labor, I'm saying the job is total of $9,000. If I'm using ABC, it's saying the job is really about $7,300. So in reality, if you're able to do ABC, it's recommended that you do that because it is the more accurate of the three. Especially since we have so much other stuff going on beyond direct labor or beyond, machine hours. So because you got other activities, then you should be using ABC. Bottom line. All right? But if you don't have that capability, a lot of companies will still do the old school, and that's probably causing them to have unrealistic costs. Okay, so that was kind of like chapter 6, so to speak. Stuff that you had to do on the last exam. And now last week before we went on break, I introduced you to ABC. So we learned this technique in full, showed you this example. And this also happens to be what we're learning in chapter 7 of our new unit. Except there's a little bit of a twist with ABC, and we also have a couple of other techniques that we're going to learn as well. All right, one of them is called CCR, and then the other one is called RVU. So let me just click on this, and if I can bring your attention to the right-hand part of the screen, I got some notes here for us. So chapter 7 is called Service Line Costing and Pricing. A couple of key pieces to talk about. First one, the objective is basically estimating costs at the micro level, which is what we were doing before with ABC. And when we say estimating costs at the micro level, looking at it from a service and or patient level. So the goal is to reduce costs. That's always should be, if you asked any company, what's your goal? Maximize profits and minimize costs. So that with healthcare reform, they really wanted to do that because costs were unrealistic, and they may still be, but that's a goal of the healthcare reform. Another goal is to create capitated contracts. What's capitated mean? Various payment methods, right? Figuring out ways to come up with good capitated contracts. And they encourage providers to shift their attention from optimizing reimbursements to increasing quality while containing costs. And this is just kind of summarizing some of the key elements that I saw in your chapter. So there's 3 different ways to calculate the cost of the job or the cost of the healthcare facility. One is the CCR method, cost to charge method. So what you're going to find is it seems a little bit like the stuff we did in the last chapter. So if you remember just in the previous folder here, I used direct labor hours as my volume. Then I used machine hours as my volume. And then with ABC, I had a variety of different volumes. So if you keep that thought process in mind, look at what these methods do. Cost to charge method, CCR, the volume is the charge. So instead of direct labor, we're using charges. So if you look at the data that's over here, I should probably label this data. Data for CCR, RVU, and ABC. You will notice that in this little quasi-income statement-ish kind of thing, I have annual charges. So your textbook likes to refer to charges using that term, but they really mean revenue that they're earning. So these are this is what they're charging their customers, their patients, okay? And then they also have revenue via reimbursements as well. Okay, so this technique is saying let's base our overhead on revenue, and specifically the charge revenue. So that's what that means. So CCR is basically cost to charge. And if you think about it, that's kind of like how the formula works. Budgeted overhead is a cost, and the charge is on the bottom. That's normally the volume, direct labor costs, machine hours, setups, whatever. This time it's charges. So it's like you're being introduced to a new volume. So if you keep it that simple, you probably won't have much difficulty with this. It's just adapting to a couple of other nuances that you have to deal with. So notice what I did. So I created the little formula here, total budgeted overhead divided by total charges, and I just reminded you that that's our volume. You come up with your rate, and then you multiply that by your actual volume, and that gives you your overhead applied. Sound familiar? You already did this for me on the last test. We're just learning new techniques, okay? Then we have this other technique called RVU, all right, and that's relative value unit. And I have a little something over here for each of these. So cost to charge, overhead based on consumption of charges, the relative value unit, the RVU, the overhead is based on complexity and time required for each service. So, if there's more hard work involved, there's more, details, more analysis, then obviously that should, remember how we talked about how should we split the costs of the RG&E bill for our classroom? Should we base it on how many students walk in every day in this classroom? Should we base it on square footage? Should we base it, how many minutes the room is available? There's so many different techniques, right? So cost to charge, they're saying let's base it on charges. Relative value, let's base it on complexity and time required for each service. So it's a little bit kind of leaning towards activity-based costing, right? And where do we get this information? In the data, I have listed the info. By the way, this example is actually in your textbook, but I found some flaws with the way it's set up and how it's done. So that's why I'm redoing the example that's in the text. So, for example, some of this stuff wasn't done for you like upfront. And same thing with the ABC data. So hopefully by the time I get done, you can go back and reread that example that's in your text, and you'll nail it. You'll understand it. Okay. Okay. So anyways, so if you notice here, the formula total budgeted overhead, it's always the numerator, and we're going to divide by the RVU times your volume totals. So over here we have our annual volume, and we have our RVUs per visit. 5,000 times 10 is where this 50,000 came from. 5,000 times 18 is where the 90,000 came from. This 10 and 18 is based on analysis. You can look some of that stuff up to help a company figure out, or a healthcare facility to figure out what is the RVU per visit. So there are some established values that you can reference, but whenever we do it, they're going to be given. Okay, so just understand that normally you would have been given the annual volume and you would have been given the RVU. So I just happen to do this step for us, okay, which we'll have to do anyways to come up with this 140, and that's what needs to be in that denominator. Okay, just a little heads up. So normally you would just be given this. Let me just put this in a different color. All right, so you would just be given this info. They would say, hey, annual volume 5,000 for service X, 5,000 for service Y, the RVUs per visit 10 and 18. So obviously service Y has a, more time and complexity associated because it's been given a higher RVU. You see what I'm getting at? So it'd be like, this job, service Y is a lot more technical. Maybe it's like an MRI, like which I'm going to be having on April 9th. Maybe, and I think I have to be there like for 4 hours. So, how would you compare an MRI to just an actual in-office visit? So there's more involved with doing an MRI than just an office visit. You see what I'm getting at? So they gave that a higher RVU. Okay? So in pink here is what you would be given, and then notice what I did, 5,000 times 10 to get 50,000, 5,000 times 18 to get 90, and then 140,000 is the result. This 140 is what would go in our denominator when we actually do this example. Okay. If I go back to the CCR, total budgeted overhead divided by total charges, okay, where are our total charges? Here they are. So I did this in yellow. So notice over here I highlighted in yellow. Total charges for X, 700,000. Total charges of Y for 1,400,000 for a grand total of 2 million. So notice what I have here in the denominator, total charges, total volume. Okay. And then we have ABC, which is a lot more complicated, but we'll get to there in a second. Okay, so let's do the CCR method. We'll do that first. I'm going to do this in yellow to kind of correspond with the color coordination I already have going on here. So to do the CCR method, we want to do the formula, total budgeted overhead divided by the total charges. So let's write that out. So total budgeted overhead, and we're going to divide that by the total charges. So total budgeted overhead, if you look at the data that was given to us, the total budgeted overhead is right here. Those are our indirect costs. So that would be $300,000. And we're going to divide that by the total charges, which is $2,000,001. So if I do that math, take 300,000 and divide it by the 2,000,001, look at the number that I get. Okay. So now in your textbook example, they rounded this to 14.3%. It's okay to round it from a visual perspective. But if you just use 14.3% from this point forward, it's going to cause your answers to be off due to rounding. So I'll write 14.3%, I'll refer to it as 14.3%, but any math that I do, I'll be using the original number that was unrounded. Okay? So if you go and re-look at the example that was in the book, it starts on page 235, and then on page 236, you're going to start seeing some numbers that are a little different from me compared to the textbook. They're going to be off due to rounding. So if you're okay with being off due to rounding, then use the rounded figure of 14.3%, which is what they did. But you know me, I don't like doing that. Okay, so we're now going to be using this 14.3% as our rate. So this is our overhead rate using the CCR method. All right, so now what we're going to do is we're going to take the individual costs, the individual charges associated with service X and service Y, and we're going to multiply them by the rate. Okay, so let me just copy what I've got here, save myself a little bit of time. So there's service X and service Y, and now we're going to multiply that. Let me just copy this number here. So I'm actually multiplying by 14.3%. I'm just not using the rounded results. So if I do this math, I get 100,000. In your textbook, they got 100,100. And when I go to do Y, I get 200,000. In your textbook, they got 200,200. So instead of splitting up 300,000, they're splitting up 303,000, which is crazy. I should say 3,300. 300,300. Oh my God. So bottom line is, if you're okay with what they did in the textbook, then fine. But I'm using exact values as opposed to what was in the book. Okay? So 100,000 and 200,000 is the makeup of the $300 of overhead costs. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to copy this part and plop it in over here. So we know the direct costs, 242, 485, total of 727.5. We originally knew that there was $300,000 of overhead, but we didn't know how to split it up. Should we just split it 50-50 and call it a day? Give X 150, give it Y 150, and do peanut butter costing, Or let's go based on charges. So we just figured out that of that 100, we're going to give, of that 300, we're going to give 100 to X, and we're going to give 200 to Y. So now if I add these up, I get a total of 342, 500, 685, and that equals the 1,027,500. So now I want to divide by volume, because one of the goals is to figure out what's your cost per visit. Right? Not only do you want to know your actual cost, but what is it per visit? Well, we know that there were 5,000 visits that was given. That's the annual volume here. So let me just put that up there. So those are the visits, 5,000 visits, okay? So now if I take 342.5 and I divide by the volume, divide by the visits, I'm going to get my cost per visit. And I get $68.50 per visit. And this other one, actually just copy that formula. And I get $137 per visit. So there are two things that we wanted to, there are multiple things we wanted to accomplish. First off, I wanted to show you the CCR method, which I did. And one of the goals was to distribute this 300,000 to X and Y. So instead of just splitting it 50-50, we decided to give 100 of it to X, 200 of it to Y. And how did we do that? We based it on total charges. Okay, so we went total 2,000,001. 300 divided by 2,000,001 was a 14.3%. And then multiplied the 14.3% by X's charges and Y's charges, and that's how we were able to split the 300. And then we took the split of 100 and 200, added it to the direct costs of X and Y, and we came up with 342, 685, divided it by the number of visits, and we ended up with those results, $68.50, $137 even. So now we're going to do the next technique, which is RVU, and we're going to compare this part when we're done. We're going to see what's their cost per visit under the RVU technique. Okay? So CCR is officially done. Put a box around that thing. All right, so let's now do the RVU technique. So let me go down here. And I'm going to be doing this in orange. Looks like somebody's on a motorcycle outside my house. Get in the house! Nobody should be out. All right. So for RVU, again, here's the formula. Total budgeted overhead divided by the RVU times volume. All right, so let me see if I can just copy that. So doing all that stuff. Okay. So now my total budgeted overhead, as you know, is $300,000. My denominator, according to the formula, is RVU times volume, but I want the grand total. So what I need to do is, remember, this is what would have been given to me, 5,000 and the 10. Remember, the 10 is what they think is the value of the work. The higher the number, the higher the RVU, the more challenging the work. So this is like an office visit and they give it a 10, but an MRI, they give it like an 18. So it's more challenging work. So there's 5,000 visits, 5,000 visits. This is just a coincidence that they're the same. It's just for simplicity. So 5,000 times 10 gave us 50,000. 5,000 times 18 gave us 90. I then added the 50 and the 90, and I came up with 140. 140 is what's in the numerator. Okay? So, just like when I was doing the CCR method, the objective was to come up with the overhead rate. Well, we're going to do the same thing. 300,000 divided by 140 gives me a rate of $2.14. But we know in reality there's probably a lot more digits than that, and here they are. But we know that's approximately $2.14. So we can call it 214, but again, any math that we do, use the original result from the division. Okay, so now what do we do with this $2.14? What we're going to do is we're now going to multiply that by the two numbers that added up to 140. So we're going to use the 50 and the 90. So remember the two numbers that added up to 2,000,001, the 714, we multiplied them by the rates. So we're basically kind of doing the same idea. So I'm going to do what we did before. Service X and service Y, except I gotta do it this way. I can only take pieces of it. And then I'm gonna grab these two numbers. Oh, it didn't like it. Let's do it this way. Okay. We don't need the double lines underneath them. So this is the total RVUs, or the breakdown of the RVUs. Let's just call it RVUs. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take these two numbers and we're going to multiply it by the rate. So let me put that over here. that one over here, and I'm going to do the multiplication. So 50,000 multiplied by the $2.14, but unrounded version, gives me 107,142.86, so about 107,143. And 192,857. Okay, so now let's do what we did before with the annual cost thing. I'm going to copy this part again from the data. So now under this technique, we know that of that 300,000, we're going to give 107,142.86, or rounded up to the nearest dollar, we're going to give 107,143 to X, and the remainder to Y. So now our total costs, so remember before we had about 342.5 for X. Under this approach, 349,643. 685 for Y. Under this approach, only 677. So if we now do the division to figure out our costs per visit, we get 69.9. Let's round that to the nearest two digits here, 100 spot. Whoops. So look at the differences in answers. Under this technique, we're saying cost per visit is almost $70, whereas under CCR it was 68.50. And for Y, it's now 135.57 compared to 137 from before. So hopefully that gives you a better idea of what they were trying to explain in the textbook. And again, the luxury of doing this under the YouTube approach, you guys, even though you can't ask me questions directly, you can always text me. I'd prefer to be texted than called because I never answer a phone number that I don't recognize. So if you do have any questions, feel free to text me. My phone number is 585. Well, you know what? I'm going to put it in my Blackboard. I'll put it in Blackboard. Since I'm putting this on YouTube, I could get texted from everybody in the world. So I'm going to leave that out right now. But not that that'd be a bad thing, but, you know, just to be safe. But in Blackboard, I will put my cell number so that if anybody needs to get a hold of me, you can. All right. But the beauty of this is you can rewind it, you can freeze frame, you can mute me if you don't want to hear my voice, whatever the case may be. You can watch this unlimited amount of times. All right, so now let's do the last one for today. And we're only going to have like one chat per week. So I know we met twice a week, but I'm doing this so that we can do just once a week meeting. And I will upload, I already uploaded the solutions to chapters 7 and 8. And for PowerPoints and solutions. So, you know, the next session we do will most likely be material out of the next chapter unless there's something else I want to throw in there in addition to what we've done today. Okay? So just be on the lookout for that. And then, you know, after the second YouTube video that I post, or third, whenever this unit comes to an end, I will upload the exam onto Blackboard, and then you guys just, download it. You can type right into Excel if you like, and then just email it to me, and then we'll go from there. And we'll just proceed the rest of the semester in this fashion. All right, who knows? You might like this way better than the way we were doing it. All right. Let's now go ahead and do the last technique, which is ABC. So again, when we're done with ABC, we're going to compare our final results here, cost per visit. So right now, $68.50 versus $137, $69.93 versus $135.57, but really it's these two that we're really comparing against each other, and these two against each other. So 68 versus almost 70, 137 versus a little over 135. Okay, so to do ABC, I kind of had to really take what was given in the textbook and put it in a format that I think would be easier to understand. So what I did was I created the annual activity. So remember, we're trying to find the cost drivers to these activities. So what would be a cost driver for checking in? Number of visits. You might have other ideas, but this is what the book had. Assessment, let's assess your situation, where you're sitting in the doctor's office. So that's how many minutes that's involved. Diagnosis, also based on minutes. Treatment, they decided minutes. Prescription could be based on number of drugs assigned or prescribed. Checkout based on number of visits, and billing, number of bills per visit. Okay. So for service department X, you can see the check-ins will be based on number of visits. So 5,000 visits for X, 5,000 visits for Y. That's the same that was over here. Okay. Let me just put that in green. All right. 5 minutes, 10 minutes. For X and Y for assessment. So I didn't break them all down, but I broke this one down for assessments. Like, how did they come up with, this $1? Well, they got the $1 by doing $75,000 budgeted overhead divided by budgeted volume. So pretty much that's what we did under ABC, what we did in that other folder, budgeted overhead divided by budgeted volume. But how did they get this 75,000? That's what's unique, right? And down here I broke it down. So total annual cost of direct labor and overhead. So in this particular case, the way they're doing ABC is they're not just doing it on overhead. They're doing it on all direct costs as well. So direct labor and overhead. So that's different. So that goes against what I was saying in class, the last couple of classes, where your material and labor has no impact, or your overhead has no impact on your direct stuff. Here they're doing ABC involving all costs. Okay, so direct and indirect. So just let you know. So in other words, look at our data, the original data. Direct cost $727,500, and then your indirect was $300,000. So $1,027,500, look, $1,027,500. So they're using all costs. So totally a different style than what we saw in the class that we had the last time we were together. Okay? But if you look at it, look how they came up with this 75,000. They said, all right, if it's the total annual cost of direct labor and overhead by one nurse required to conduct the initial investment is $75,000 annually, spread over 5,000 visits at 5 minutes per visit. Okay, so 5,000 visits, right, given 5 minutes. We had to be given that. So 5,000 times 5 minutes, that's 25,000 minutes a year for service department X. For service department Y, 5,000 visits at 10 minutes a visit. So notice it takes longer in Y, which is probably why they had a higher RVU. Okay? So it takes double the time to do an assessment, diagnosis, and a treatment, so on and so forth. So 5,000 times 10 is 50. So 25 plus 50, that's where they came up with the 75,000 minutes. So if you wanted to break it down and see exactly where they got this 75, this 125, this 150, so on and so forth, just look at your textbook and you'll see that it was done very similar to the way I just showed you how to do the assessment. Okay, so to make a long story short, I've done a lot of the work for us already. I've already calculated the overhead rate. So remember over here we calculated the rate, 14.3%, $2.14 per RVU. Okay, this one I already did the work, right? Just to save us a little bit of time. So remember the formula: budgeted overhead. Here it is, right here. I put it in dark green, divided by budgeted volume, dark green, and came up with the rates. So 50 divided by 10, did the math right here for you. So I tried to eliminate all possible questions that you guys may have. All right. So 50 divided by 10, 5. 75 divided by 75, 1. 250 divided by 125, 2. So on and so forth. So these are the multiple rates. So notice here we had one rate. One rate. ABC, multiple rates. Just like we saw in the previous example last class. Multiple rates. 3, 8, 200, 400. So that part's the same. So what we need to do is we need to take these rates and we need to multiply it by the actual volume. All right, like the minutes or visits or whatever the case may be. Okay, so we've got visits, we got minutes, we got number of drugs, visits, number of bills, right? Per visit, so to speak. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this lower here. And then so I'm breaking up this data, and then what we want to do is we want to multiply these by the rates, the overhead rates. So bear with me here. So when we multiply 1 times 5, 5 times 1, what's the result? That's what we're about to do right now. And we get these results. Okay. Whoops, I think I forgot one. There we go. So we got 5, 5, 20, 30. This one needs to be formatted better. There we go. 10 cents, $5 and $10. And this other one, 5, 10, 30, 60. This one needs to be formatted better. 40 cents, $5 and $20. So let me add these up. So the technique is totally different than the previous two. This is going to give us the cost per visit answer first. Let me go to the nearest hundredth. So this is like our answer in blue over to the left for the previous two ones that we did. So remember here we said our cost per visit was $68.50, 137. Now we're saying it's $75.10, 130. So we're giving more to department or service department X than we are to Y, as it's turning out. Okay, so we could, if we wanted to figure out our total cost, let's do what we did before, take these annual costs, and we'll just put it down here. So this is ABC. So we actually know the end result first. So instead of dividing, we're going to be multiplying, right? Because we're working backwards. So this times that. And then that means we're going to subtract. So notice when you look at it this way, of that 300,000, we gave 133 of it to X, 167 of it to Y. Under RVU, it was 107 versus 192 of that 300, and under CCR, it was 100 and 200. Okay, so let me box this one, put this one in green. And I'll just kind of border this one in green. So hopefully when you go back and look at the example that's in your chapter, you can kind of compare what I did versus what they gave. So in the textbook, this information spanned probably from page 234 all the way to 242. So for homework, I would recommend that you do on page 257, question 7.1. Also, problem 7.6 on page 260. And then problem 7.8 starts at the bottom of page 260. Most of it is on page 261. And the solutions are already posted in Blackboard, but work on them first and then see how you did based on the solutions. Okay, with 7.8, just do part A only. All right, that does it. That's our first session under this COVID-19 crisis. So hopefully this isn't too bad, but go back, read the chapter, watch this video one more time if you need to, and we'll go from there. All right, you guys, hang in there and till we meet again. All right, take it easy. Bye-bye.